Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got in front of me today is a King Tiger, which even in 1/100 scale is a little difficult to get all into the camera at once. These things were titanic. Now this is one of the new kits from Battlefront for Flames of War, and it's going to be available from June the 6th. I believe the pre-orders are live now, so go ahead, check that out. I'll pop a couple of links in the description too. Now, a couple of the paints I'm going to use today are a little brighter than you might be expecting, and there is a good reason for that, which I'll explain as we get into it. So starting from the very beginning, all of the paints will be listed in the description below. Let's get started. Now before I go ahead and prime this, let's get a quick look at the kit itself. It went together very easily, there's not a huge number of parts, and the detail is really nice. The recent Battlefront plastics have been really impressive, I gotta say, and the King Tiger, it carries that on. It's just a wonderful kit. One thing to bear in mind when you are assembling it is to pay attention to the order in which things go on. Don't make the same mistake I did and try and attach the fenders before adding the side armor plates, but if you're a little bit quicker on the draw with the instructions than I am, you should be fine. So let's take this outside. I'm going to hit it with a primer spray of skeleton bone from the army painter, but anything light and just off-white will do, even a light grey or similar. Now, one more useful thing is a painting jig for the turret. So you see it's got this little peg in here which fits into the tank itself. What I've done is taken one of my old corks and just jammed, really high-tech here, a round file just in there a few times, wiggle it around, and then that peg will fit straight in there. And I've got something that I can hold the turret with while I paint. Now if you can find a primer color that's going to work for Dunkelgelb, then all the better. I'd suggest something like Vallejo's dark yellow would probably work pretty well, but we're going to use a brush here and do it the long way. So I've got here green ochre. This is a Vallejo color as well, and most of what we're going to use today is going to be from Vallejo. I've got just a little bit of water in my brush, and we're going to apply this over the entire vehicle. Now, don't worry if it doesn't cover perfectly with your first pass, although as part of the reason why we've used a light primer, you can come back and apply a second over top. Now after 2 coats, we have a nice solid green ochre base coat. What I'm going to move on to now is the camo pattern. Now I'm going to copy something that I've seen in a color plate online. You don't have to invent all of these color schemes whole cloth. There's plenty of reference to copy if you're going to find that easier. Now I'm going to use here olive green, which is, as you'll see, quite bright. But when we apply this, it will dull down a little bit over time. And we want a slightly lighter green going on than you might expect. Now, there's a wonderful concept in scale modeling called scale fade, which means the smaller the miniature, the brighter the colors you have to paint it with, because the way that light interacts with a small miniature, less light reflects and hits our eyes. So we see darker colors than we've actually put on the miniature. Now what this means, if we were to take a real King Tiger, take accurate colors from it, and paint those straight onto our miniatures, it would look seriously way too dark. So we have to basically we have to trick the eye into seeing what should be the right color. So that's why a really light green here. So I'm going to roughly lay this down with a couple of coats from a fairly scraggly old brush, but we will fix this up in a little bit to look a bit more reasonable. After 1 pass, that is going to look awful, but don't worry because we still have plenty of work to do. What I'm going to do now is move on down to a smaller brush and start applying a second coat, but also using this as an opportunity to smooth out some of the edges. So I've essentially sketched in the shape of the camo stripes that I want. Now what I'm going to do is fill them out, make them look a little tidier. Don't forget, of course, any steps that you're performing on the hull, make sure you're doing those on the turret too. Most of these camo schemes will line up turret to hull, so just double check against them occasionally to make sure that your schemes are lining up correctly. Now we're going to apply our second camo color. This is Cavalry Brown, and it's a really nice oxide red sort of color. It quite closely matches what the hulls underneath these tanks when they were first painted would look like. what we're going to do is, instead of matching these stripes entirely, is to lay down a little next to them and then slightly bulk out in some areas before turning the thing and coming back in closer. It's not a terribly good explanation. What I mean essentially is that these red stripes weren't the same thickness and they didn't follow all the way that the green ones did. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room here. And again, if you are having any trouble, you can check online. Follow along with those color plates you'll find. Now, hand painting camo stripes is not the fast way of doing things, but it will look cool. So a little bit of extra work now, it's going to look ace by the time you're finished. What I have here, this is Strong Tone from the Army Painter, but instead of using it neat from the bottle, I've got here one of my little plastic pellets and about half the amount of water. So mixing it up, about 2 to 1 Strong Tone to water, we're going to apply this over the entire miniature. You'll see very quickly it runs into those recesses, and when you apply it, try and keep your brush moving in the same direction as it goes on. We're going to apply on the top first, and then we'll do the same to the sides as well. Now once you've gone over the entire tank with this, give it about half an hour to dry, and we'll have a look at what this looks like once that step is finished. Once that's had plenty of time to dry, you'll see how the Strong Tone settles naturally in all the recesses, but we do still get some neat color modulation on the flat panels. A little bit of water is really going to help there, but we do want to highlight this. So what I've got is a little bit of dark sand over here on a bit of kitchen towel, and this is a Luxe pencil. It is an old makeup brush, and these things are the best for dry brushing. We're going to work most of this off into the bristles. And if you're ever worried about how much you're going to leave behind, just dry brush the back of your hand sometime. All right, it will really help, because what's important here is you want next to nothing on this brush. So what we'll do once we've got our dark sand sorted is to lightly flick along the edges of the vehicle. And you'll see we pick up very quickly those exposed edges and we get our third dimension, our nice quick highlight without needing to do a lot of complex work. Now, the best thing about dark sand is that it actually works very well over the green and the red too. So you don't need to go overboard with it in those areas, but a little on those edges and you will see we still get about the right look. So very carefully dry brushing the entire miniature, making sure to catch all of those raised areas. Now there so far is our King Tiger. What we need to do now is all the rest of the details, and a lot of this is going to be done with just German grey, which is a really nice, not quite black. There's a lot of it we're going to do though, so let's get cracking on. So first of all, we're going to paint this onto the tracks. Now I find a brush nice and flat here works really well. Just come up close to the road wheels, but don't paint those. We're going to swap to a smaller brush for that. And on the outside, luckily, this is nice and quick. You can just jam this on. Just mind that you don't splatter anything onto the stuff you've painted already. The underneath, as you can see, I'm not too concerned by. And then we'll swap to a smaller brush. I'm using a medium layer brush from Citadel here. And we'll start applying the same color to things like the tow cables, the MG, anything like that. Remembering as well that you can now use this same brush to tidy up any of the little bits that you might have missed on the tracks. So as well as the tracks, the tow cables and the MG, don't forget things like the heads of any metallic tools, the exhaust pipes, and as well the tracks that are attached to the turret. Now the turret's going to matter right now because before we get onto any of the weathering, we're going to apply the decals to the turret. Now, I find it easiest when preparing decals to go on to just pop them on a little bit of kitchen towel and wet the kitchen towel so that that stays damp. That way, I can let these start sliding around on their backing paper and I don't have to panic. I don't have to immediately rush off and make sure these are on the miniature straight away. So, they're moving around. Let's lift those up and we'll apply this now to the turret. So, slide that off. That'll do as well. That's fine. Now once your decal's dried, it's going to have magically turned into the unit markings. Unfortunately, the black printing over the white on mine came out a little bit screw-whiff, so I've swapped to one that looks better that way. What I have now is a little bit of packing foam, something you'd get from a blister, and I'm just dipping this into a tiny wee bit of German grey still, and then dabbing it off roughly onto some kitchen towel. What I'll do then is pick an area where either crew are likely to be stepping, or something along those lines, and just lightly dab a little bit of chipping onto the armour. You don't want to go crazy with this, but you want to leave your weathering until after you've applied your decals ordinarily. So areas that are going to see a lot of traffic, up on the hull, around hatches, and especially on fronts of fenders and what have you, it's a good spot for just a wee dab of this to add a little bit of visual interest. Now we're getting somewhere. What I have now, this is red leather, which I've watered down about 10:1. It's really not too precise, so don't worry too much if yours doesn't look exactly like this. What I'm going to do is use this as a track wash for some rust effects. And once this has had a chance to dry thoroughly, we can come back and we will pick out some of the edges with a steel colour. But for now, we're going to apply rust over all of the track links. As well, while that dries, what you can do is use the same mix to pick out a few areas where you want a little bit of collected rust. So with just a fine brush, you can run a tiny wee bit of this into your recesses and along any areas where you've done chipping too. So we'll run this across the top of the chipping there, and then just a few quick flicks downward to add a little bit of colour to some of this weathering. Now in reality, you don't really want to add a huge amount of this because tank crews would take very good care of their vehicles. But it does look cool, so if you are painting for effect, rather than necessarily being 100% accurate, well, a little bit of this certainly won't hurt. Now once at last that rust stuff has dried, we're starting to look a lot less like a bright yellow cartoon, and I'm really pleased with how this is going. So what I'm going to do now, we need to protect our miniature for gaming, and we're also going to take that gloss off. I'm going to use Vallejo's matte varnish spray. So I need to take this outside, hit it with the spray can, and I think you're going to see a real big difference. Now I cannot stress enough the importance of a good matte varnish, because not only is it going to protect everything, but it dulls all of those colors down just a fraction, gets rid of the shine, and it brings it all together really nicely. That's really starting to look the business. But there is one last trick I want to show you, and that's involving a pencil. This is a B. I do recommend if you can grab them, get a 2B. A slightly softer lead is going to be handy here. Let's pop the turret off for now. We'll get up close to where some of the chipping is, and what I'm going to do is lightly rub the pencil against that detail. And you'll see we get a cool, slight silver sheen to things without having to add a whole lot of extra work. Now you can do this to the tow cables as well if you want, just a wee buff of this to make some areas on them shine. And not only that, but it also works on your tracks. With just a bit of pencil, you can not only do your scratches and chipping in, but you can also paint in the tools and what have you. Speaking of the tools, I'm going to skip back very quickly and finish a detail that I missed earlier, which is a little bit of beige brown, and we're going to fill in the wood on those handles. Once I've done this though, what I'm going to do is pop them up. Let's get a look at what this bad boy looks like when it is all finished. And there at last, our King Tiger is complete. Now the subject of German camo during World War II is a massive one, but you don't have to be an expert to get some pretty cool looking miniatures on the table. As I mentioned earlier on, there are one or two decisions here which are a little brighter than they should be ordinarily, but I think for the purposes of a miniature we're going to put on the table to play games with, this will look better at arm's length and be visible across the table. Remember ordinarily that you're painting for your opposition to see what you're putting against them. So once again, thank you very much to Battlefront for sending these along for me to have a play with. I've thoroughly enjoyed painting this one, and I know, why not some more Germans? I've really got the bug for 1:100 scale stuff now. As always, thank you very much as well to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who keep me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Rod and Jimmy. Your support lets me carry on doing this. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.